SPK Network. What is the SPK Network? We get asked this a lot. Well, imagine Amazon Web Services. I'm not sure if you're aware of what that is. AWS, otherwise known as. It's an infrastructure operation system that allows you to run digital platforms very easily, but also very expensively. And AWS will provide you with the infrastructure, the back-end infrastructure that you need to run those platforms efficiently. The problem then is that AWS controls your infrastructure. So now you're kind of at the whims of AWS. They control the infrastructure to do encoding of video, content delivery of content, uploading, processing, account systems, all sorts of different things that you need, back-end things that you need to run a content platform where you're supposed to have free speech and discussion. As the users, as normal people, we see these things as public squares where you can go debate, discuss. You should be able to discuss things in public on these platforms. But the platforms are run on the back end by things like AWS, which is, don't get me wrong, it's a fantastic service in terms of the technical ability that it provides. But from the political point of view, from the free speech point of view, it's very limited and it's controlled and it's a centralized system. Because AWS, one regulated entity that's registered and listed in the USA, is at the whims of the US government and the laws in the country. So as the laws change, AWS has to clamp down on various operators of infrastructure on its services. This is the problem with the centralized world. The old centralized world is manipulatable and controllable. Same thing for Google. Think about Google Drive. Google Drive hosts millions of files and they're hosted on Google servers. Google doesn't know what half those files are, which is kind of sketchy if you ask me, because it means there's loads of content on Google Drive that Google isn't able to understand what it is. Well, many would say that's a bit of a threat. But either way, Google control those files. So if they do find a file that they don't agree with or they don't like, they can limit it. They can put restrictions on that file. They may be ordered to put restrictions on that file by a government entity. Otherwise, their employees will face the consequences of the government wrath. So coming back to SPK Network, it solves these problems. The SPK Network is a network whereby the community themselves, the members of the community, me and you, we run the infrastructure that AWS runs, but we run it for ourselves in the service of our own community. We run the infrastructure and the storage capabilities of Google Drive, but we run it ourselves for our own communities, in the service of our own communities. This is incredibly important because once the community can run its own infrastructure, the people within that community have digital freedom. They have sovereignty in the online space, as long as they're running on the infrastructure that's provided by their own communities. Now, you can't just say, oh, I'm going to run infrastructure. You have to be able to incentivize that infrastructure to keep it online, to keep it economically viable. And this is what the SPK Network does. Initially, it focuses on peer-to-peer storage. So anyone can run an IPFS storage node and get incentivized and rewarded for running those nodes and storing files that the network wants it to store. And people, operators and platforms, and people with large amount of content that they can't store themselves, operating on that network, can put money into the network and say, hey, here's a contract with some money on it and some files on it. I want you, Mr. Community Member, Mr. Computer Operator, Mr. Normal Person, to help me back these files up. And we're going to ping you at random to check to see if you are backing up what you say you're storing. And if you are, the system's going to release funds to you and incentivize you for providing the infrastructure. And that infrastructure may well be something as small as just your spare space on your laptop that you're just sitting there idle anyway, or a spare server that you're running, or a server that you can spin up and run for yourself for $5 a month, right? These are community, it's the ability for the community to run its own storage infrastructure and store peer-to-peer, and then allow platforms and media people and people that need access to decentralized file storage to come in and incentivize those people and say, hey, we're going to pay you for storing this content. We're going to pay you for storing this file. We're going to pay you for storing this code. And if enough people are volunteering their spare storage space on their computers, on spare servers that they've got, it means that the storage potentially can be way cheaper than the current orthodoxy of centralized internet storage. Again, if it's centralized, it can be blocked, it can be censored, it can be stopped, controlled and regulated. When it's run by the community, when the storage is done by the community, it's regulated by the community. And the community will store what it wants to store, when it wants to store, how it wants to store it, at the market price it decides to store it at. So these things are incredibly important, incredibly powerful. The SPK Network starting off with storage, but it will move to content delivery infrastructure. so the community members themselves can deliver the content to anyone else that's consuming content in different parts of the world. It will also do uploading, encoding of content, so that the whole chain, at least of a video platform, can be done on the Speak network initially. But it doesn't stop there. It moves on to many, many other things. You don't just have to have video capability. Any image server that's got tens of thousands of images on it, instead of paying Wasabi, whatever, God knows whatever, $10,000 a month, $6,000 a month to store all those images, with backup by Wasabi, and if Wasabi is ever pressured to censor that stuff, they can do that. This is the alternative where it's Wasabi, but it's run by the community instead. And the community does all the backing up, so they can back up all the image store servers for various platforms, whichever platforms want to get involved and use this. It also means that community members are going to be able to build companies, and they're going to be able to provide decentralized storage services to existing operators in the digital world. People that need decentralized storage, people that don't want to leave all their files on one server or two servers. They want to store certain files on 5, 6, 7, 8 servers, and they're happy to pay a little bit of money for that, especially if the going rate's lower because people are just using their spare storage space to help back this stuff up. So that's kind of the Speak network in a nutshell. In the future, I see this being used for things like AI, artificial intelligence, where currently, for example, the ideals around AI is that it's open. It's open for everyone to be able to use. You can see the code, you can see what language models it's trained on. Well, that kind of stopped very abruptly in the last 3-4 years, where now these companies have started closing what they train their AI on, so you can't really tell where it was trained from. They've started closing down the source code, so you can't understand the source code and how it's written and how it works. So these AIs are very political. They become very political. What a shocker, Well, really, ideally, we don't want that with our AI. We want open AI. We want truly open AI. And you can run AI open to a certain extent with limited funding, where people run their own nodes and they run them openly, but that's not really sustainable because as that stuff scales, people need business models in order to sustain. So what you really need is a way to incentivize the infrastructure operators. So the most basic form of AI use case for the Speak network is that it can just store the source code. It can just store open public source code all over the world on multiple people's servers instead of storing it on centralized, censorable servers. The other thing that it can do, by virtue of the fact that it's running on the Hive blockchain, and of course other open blockchains as well, you can directly demonstrate with the storage of the code that's stored by the community itself, it can be openly demonstrated that AI is trained on open blockchains, where you can see the history, you can see the political ideology of the community, you can see the transactions, the back and forth, the communications, the arguments, the disagreements, everything. You can see it all on the chain. So you can say, well, is this chain for me? And then is the AI I'm using being trained on the historical model of that chain? I don't want it trained on some shady back-end database, God knows what political ideology and how it comes to its conclusions. I want the source code open. I want it stored by the community in an open, distributed database, off-chain, because most of this stuff is too heavy for on-chain. And then I want to run the programs and the servers that operate these AI off incentivized layers that are incentivized from neutral layers with no ICO, no premine, no CEO, no founders, no venture capital, no conflicts of interest, running these public neutral layers that then incentivize the storage and the operation of the code of these AIs. And then lastly, I want to be able to see where the AI is trained, what public database was it trained on, and who runs that public database. Is it immutable? Is the public database, can you shut it down? Is it secure? Was there a premine or an ICO? Is there a CEO, someone that can be pressured and controlled? If not, I like that public database. That's why we run our stuff on Hive. Hive meets those criteria. It is not centralized. It's not censorable. It's released in a fair, open way, and it's neutral. So it allows you to permissionlessly operate these ecosystems on top so that you can get fair, open use cases. And we think that AI, Hive plus the Speak network, Hive as the training model, the storage, the text storage, and Speak network as the incentivization for the infrastructure operation and the storage of the code and kind of more heavy aspects of the AI infrastructure can all be run and incentivized on community operated nodes. And so now you actually have open AI. That is definitely one use case. Another use case that I've seen that's currently being built on the Speak network is a Google Drive replacement. So you can store your files in your own folder, but you can say, hey, can I get these backed up? I'm willing to put a little bit of money in each month, hopefully cheaper than Google can do, because it's community operated servers on hopefully people's spare hard drives. So it should be cheaper because that stuff's already free anyway. It's sitting there idle. And then I can back up my files, the files that I would have stored on Google, I can back them up on the Speak Network and have them in a folder that I can access. And if one of them goes down, there's still 2, 3, 4 more copies of it, depending on how much you're incentivizing. So these models make sense. They make sense to do in a decentralized way. The other thing that I've seen that's starting to happen is people are starting to encode the files. So there's people starting to store files that they have no idea what those files are, and only the original issuer has the key. Well, what that means is that, well, first of all, you can get privacy of storage, and you never really know that with Google. The flip side is that Google's storing a load of files that it doesn't know what they are, which is even more worrying probably. But if you can do this via a community and you can store encrypted files, the community members may not want to store encrypted files, but some of them will. Some of them in freer, fairer jurisdictions will. So now you can store encrypted files, and the originator has the key, or an NFT, you can tie that to an NFT. And what that means is now you can have actual decentralized subscriptions to content. Anyone paying the subscription fee, either for a monthly fee or for access to an individual piece of content, can be given the keys to release the encrypted data off the Speak Network. It's backed up by the community. There is no middleman there. There is no corporation, no entity, no founder, no CEO, no entity that can be called up to shut things down. That is true use of decentralized technology. And it's a use case whereby you can apply subscriptions, paywalls, you can apply decentralized storage, operation of code and servers, all incentivized by the Speak Network, peer-to-peer storage, massive, massive use cases. And that's really what the Speak Network is. For us, it's really important because we run a platform called 3Speak. It's a video platform. And that's where this whole thing came from. We're like, well, how do we truly decentralize a video platform? Because you can't store video on chain. It's too heavy to store on chain. So the only thing you can do is store the text references on chain, but you can't store the actual videos. The videos need to be stored on servers. So all these decentralized platforms, all these freedom of speech platforms that are video based, they've all got their videos stored on centralized servers. And those servers are shutdownable, censorable, and manipulatable, and corruptible. So it just doesn't work. You can't have, in the current modern day and age, you can't have decentralized video storage. But when you are able to store those videos using IPFS, where you can incentivize the node operators, and the node operators are the individual community members like me and you, now you have a way to decentralize the storage of video. If you do the same thing for content delivery, the same thing for encoding, where community members can run their own nodes of those things, the whole chain of the video platform experience is now run by the community, and it's decentralized, which means it's way harder to shut down. It's way harder to have a centralized manipulatable entity in charge of things and controlling things. It means it's run by the community for the community. And those are huge use cases for us, because now we can just plug in the Speak Network to our existing platform, and we can run all of this in a truly full Web3 decentralized way, where no part of the infrastructure is run on any of our servers as a video platform. So we recommend Rumble, we recommend Odyssey. You need to use a neutral layer that has no ICO, no premine. Some of these so-called neutral layers that you're using, we know, Odyssey, that you're using layers to do your storage that have 70% premines, man. 70% premines. What are you doing? Do you even understand this? There has to be no premine. These layers that you're using, they have CEOs, they have community figureheads. You need to make sure that those things don't exist. Once they don't exist, then you have a neutral layer that can't be shut down and manipulated. But while you have those things, while you have huge premines, you have securities risk. Now for example, with Odyssey, you've already been sued by the SEC for this. Why are you going to another place to do your storage, which will eventually get the same treatment if enough controversial content gets stored on the network? You need to use networks that are actually neutral, where no one can be called up to shut the thing down. That's what the Speak Network is, and it can be plugged into any of these video platforms, and it can fully decentralize the back end so that you don't have shutdown risk. You don't have corruptibility risk, that your community actually controls and runs the infrastructure behind your platform, so that you can basically build yourselves out and focus on the front-end experience. Focus on making it look pretty and run nice. That's the Speak Network. It needs to be going into as many platforms as possible, so that we actually decentralize the internet, decentralize these content platforms, so that they can't censor, they can't be shut down, they can't be sued by governments to control the speech on there, and so that the community itself can regulate and run its own ecosystem. All right, peace out.